Even man's strength comes from Brahman. It is clear from these examples, which could be multiplied indefinitely, that the Brahman concept, by virtue of all its attributes and symbols, coincides with that of a dynamic or creative principle which I have termed libido. The relationship between Brahman and Atman, as presented in the Upaniṣads, is one of the most profound metaphysical and spiritual insights in world history. And when we bring this teaching into dialogue with Jungian psychology, it becomes possible to see it not only as a religious doctrine, but also as a living symbol of the psyche's deepest processes. In the Indian tradition, Brahman is the ultimate reality, without beginning or end, infinite, eternal, unchanging, beyond form, beyond time, beyond duality. Brahman is not a god among gods, but the very ground of being itself, the absolute fullness described as Sat Chit Ānanda, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. Atman, on the other hand, is the innermost essence of the individual person, the self that persists when all superficial layers are stripped away, the witness beyond body, sensation, thought, and personality. At first glance, Brahman and Atman seem different. One is cosmic, the other individual. But the Upaniṣadic seers made the revolutionary claim that these are not two realities, but one and the same. Atman is Brahman. The deepest self within us is identical to the ground of the universe. This realization, expressed in the formula Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art, is the key to liberation. Or moksha, the discovery that the apparent separateness of existence is an illusion, Maya, and that the truth is a radical non-duality. When we examine this through the lens of Jungian psychology, remarkable parallels appear. For Jung, the psyche is not exhausted by the ego, the conscious I that navigates daily life. Beneath and beyond the ego lies the vast unconscious, structured by archetypes, those primordial patterns of meaning. At the center of this totality is what Jung called the self, not the ego self, but the transpersonal self, the archetype of wholeness, which includes conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, light and shadow. The self is the inner image of God, the imago Dei, the totality that encompasses the finite ego within a larger order. If we read Atman as the deepest center of the individual and Brahman as the ultimate cosmic ground, then Jung's self functions as a bridge concept. It is at once the archetypal core of the psyche and an image of the absolute. Thus, when the Upaniṣads declare, this self is Brahman, Jung would say, the realization of the self within is simultaneously a participation in the universal ground of being. In both traditions, the path involves stripping away illusions. The Upaniṣads speak of neti, not this, not that, a process of negation where one denies identification with body, senses, desires, and thoughts until the pure witness remains. Jung speaks of individuation, the process through which the ego is confronted with shadow, anima or animus, and archetypal images, and slowly learns to distinguish itself from them, while at the same time integrating their energy. Both paths involve confronting projections and illusions, recognizing that what we thought was other is part of ourselves, and that what we thought was ourselves is not our deepest truth. Just as the sage discovers that his inner essence is none other than Brahman, the analytic patient may discover that his or her true center is not the ego, but the self, a transpersonal totality that dwarfs and embraces the personal life. Yet both traditions warn of dangers. In Vedanta, the illusion of separateness is Maya, but there is also the danger of mistaking the ego for the self, of clinging to a limited identity. In Jung's psychology, the parallel danger is inflation. When the ego identifies with the self, it imagines itself to be God, leading to megalomania or psychosis. The true realization of Atman equals Brahman, or of ego in relation to self, is not a swelling of the ego, but a surrender of its claim to absoluteness. The drop is not the ocean, but the drop is nothing other than the ocean's substance. The ray is not the sun, but the ray is inseparable from it. To live this paradox consciously is the essence of liberation. The imagery of Brahman and Atman also resonates with Jung's idea of the unus mundus, the one world, underlying both psyche and matter. In Indian thought, the same reality appears both inwardly as Atman and outwardly as Brahman. In Jung's psychology, synchronicity is a glimpse of this underlying unity, where inner psychic events and outer physical events mirror one another because both arise from a deeper order. Thus, the identity of Atman and Brahman corresponds to the intuition that psyche and world are not separate realms, but two expressions of the same ground. From a psychological perspective, we can say that the realization of Atman equals Brahman is an archetypal experience of wholeness, a numinous encounter with the self. Mystics describe it as an overwhelming sense of unity, beyond time and space, where the boundaries of self and world dissolve. Jung acknowledged such experiences as real encounters with the archetype of the self, though he insisted that they must be integrated carefully to avoid dissolution of the personality. The goal is not to lose individuality, but to live in conscious relationship with the transpersonal whole. This is where the Indian and Jungian perspectives subtly diverge. Advaita Vedānta speaks of ultimate identity, while Jung emphasizes dialectical relationship. But both agree that the ego is not the ultimate center, and that liberation comes from recognizing and aligning with the deeper ground. Practically, this realization transforms life. In Vedanta, the knower of Brahman becomes fearless, free from the cycle of birth and death, established in peace. In Jungian psychology, the individuated person lives from the self, in harmony with inner and outer reality, no longer driven by unconscious projections, but living a symbolic life where each moment participates in wholeness. Both paths describe a state of integration where opposites are reconciled, being and non-being, life and death, inner and outer, finite and infinite. In sum, the teaching that Atman is Brahman and Jung's concept of the self are two expressions of the same archetypal truth, that the deepest essence of the individual is not separate from the ultimate reality of the cosmos. The Indian sage discovered it through meditation and metaphysical reflection. Jung rediscovered it through dreams, symbols, and analysis. Both insist that the realization is not merely intellectual but transformative. It reshapes the entire sense of identity, liberates from fear, and anchors life in a ground that is beyond change. Psychologically, the Brahman-Atman equation shows that the inner journey of individuation is not only about personal wholeness, but about participation in a universal mystery. Spiritually, it means that to know oneself is to know the divine. Thus, whether one speaks in the language of Upaniṣadic seers or in the terms of depth psychology, the message is the same. The human soul is not an isolated fragment, but a spark of the infinite. And to realize this is to awaken to the fullness of being.